Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a little bit of a review. I think it's a good idea to do a where are we now? Let's see, allow participants to share a whiteboard. No, I don't think that's necessary. Allow commenters and viewers to facilitate in the meeting. It's necessary. Okay, advanced settings are set. Whiteboard. New whiteboard. Use classic whiteboard. And then I realized, do I even need the whiteboard? Yeah, it's fine. I'll use a whiteboard. Okay, so the 4 directions. So when we lay out the 4 directions practice, where do the traps of thinking start to fall in? So it is a specific place, so to speak. So remember that we have 3 primary things that we're looking at when we're doing our practice. We're looking to establish, elongate, and maintain. Attention, we call it IPA, which is an intentional point in advance, IPA. So basically, we're holding our point of attention into our 4 directions, 1 direction at a time. Again, the directions are external. An external direction of attention, we could say, is our 5 senses, or our sensory perception of our environment around us. So our ability to see, our ability to hear for Donna, and all of our other senses, we would consider that exterior. Although I could I could talk for hours and hours about how it's not really out there that we're perceiving, because everything comes to us. And then it is, of course, transferred into a chemical signal that's interpreted by our brain. And that creates what we call experience of something. But that is the external direction of attention, is our basic senses. And of course, in this practice, what we're doing is we are identifying basically like places and things that we can put our attention on that we have determined in advance. It could be a very long list. It could be a very small list of things, of places that you can put your attention. So I just think it's best, for me sometimes just to use the things that I'm currently doing. I don't think my techniques are all that like crazy advanced or anything. So maybe not exactly the place to begin either, but it's not like it's a fantastic thing that I'm doing necessarily. Okay, so for my exterior point of attention, one of my favorite things to do is inclusive vision. So inclusive vision is basically trying to populate as many points of data as I can in my experience. So defocused vision is to kind of create a defocused view of the world. And it is kind of using a similar technique of peripheral vision. Now, inclusive is also somewhat peripheral, but instead of creating a blur, things are still kind of sharp. So there's not a real blur in my viewing of the world, but I'm doing it in a particular way that I have intended in advance, and I'm remembering to do it. And as I wrote on the whiteboard, when I put my attention in this particular area on purpose, we would call that establishing. I have established my attention into the area. In this case, I'm using a type of inclusive vision where I want to see the sky and the ground at the same time without necessarily diverting a lot of attention to either one. Now, it doesn't blur it out per se. I would have to go more peripheral with my vision, and then that kind of blurs things out in the middle. But I don't always use the type of vision that makes things blurry. I do sometimes, actually, though. Okay, so that's just again describing what a basic trick of attention is. Exterior. Now, interior is essentially the awareness of your own physicality, the awareness of your own body in space of time, and the awareness of your body relative to itself. Sometimes we put our emotions in this category, and then sometimes we put like individual points of attention on our body, which is something that I'm getting really good at because of acupuncture. I can put my attention on very specific points in my body. And if I do that It's an act that I'm doing. I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to put my attention on Li4. Okay, I'm doing it. So my attention is partially diverted as I speak to you on Li4, which is on my foot. Wait, no, I'm sorry. Li4 is on my palm. I was paying attention to liver 3. My bad. Okay, I was paying attention to liver 3 on my foot. That's just as good. Now I'm paying attention to Li4 because it's like I said it, so now it's like I feel it. But that's an individual point on my body. So that's what we would call internal. So we have external points of attention. Now, when I would do walking exercises, or when I do walking exercises now, one of the things I really like to do now is I try to maintain a certain type of posture, a certain type of physical structure with my body that I think is going to be better for it. I think if I keep my body in a certain way, I think I'm going to be more healthy. So that's what I do. And that requires a certain something from me, and it's called my attention. I have to put my attention actively on my body to do that type of posture or structural integrity practice. But that's my internal direction. So that's 2 of the 4 directions. The third direction is easy. It's awareness of your breath. It can be breath technique, as in doing something very specific with your breath, or it can just be kind of general. You're just aware of the breath without trying to do too much with it. Some would consider that actually a little bit more of a difficult and advanced technique than manipulating the breath, well, because you just have to kind of rest with it. And sometimes a person's mind can find that very difficult to just rest with the breath, allow it to exist with your awareness, but not try to change it too much. And then the 4th direction of attention can be a little bit more tricky to explain, but we could say that the 4th direction of attention are words in your mind. It is maybe music. Maybe you're being musical and you're singing in your mind, or you're listening to music. Then that is I would say, a valid 4th direction point of attention. You could be using your imagination. So I do this a lot with what is called nedam. Actually, I could be saying that wrong because I'm not so sure I've ever heard it said out loud, but it's a type of internal meditation. I wrote it there in the chat. But it's a type of internal meditation that involves certain types of visualizations. Hey, Lauren, thanks for hanging out. So my 4th direction, I spend a lot of time with this nedam practice because I'm using a lot of my imagination and I'm combining it with the direction of breath. And so in general, describing it very quickly, that's what I mean by the 4 directions of attention. I have the external environment that I can place my attention anywhere. I'm placing my attention on the mouse. Yeah. And then now I'm going to keep it there. That's called establishing, elongating, and maintaining. So I'm still paying attention to the mouse. I have a little bit of attention diverted to it right now in my field of vision. So I can look over here, but the mouse is still right there. And then if I want to, I can put my hand on it. And now it's a tactile thing, and I can do other things with my mind, but I still have a lot of attention on my hand, and therefore attention on the mouse. So that's what I mean. I can place my attention somewhere specific. I can maintain and elongate and then maintain that attention on anything as long as it's not a habit for you. Something that maybe the mind doesn't put a lot of value into. For example, I mentioned that I like to pay attention to the sky anytime I'm outside, right? And it doesn't mean that I'm just like up here staring at no, it has a degree of my external attention, but that degree is highly deliberate, highly specific, voluntary, and chosen. And so that's what I mean by points of attention that we choose in advance. And the 4 directions of attention encourages a practitioner to establish attention in any of these 4 directions, and then in any of these 4 directions, learn to elongate the attention, and then learn to maintain it, eventually most of the time. So the traps of thinking that we're talking about today they are a part of the mechanism that makes elongate and maintain possible. Because there's one mechanism that I have found in my life that makes this possible. Without this mechanism, I don't know what I would do. I don't know. I wouldn't, this practice wouldn't exist. It's, it just wouldn't. I wouldn't be doing this. I would be probably, I have no idea. I won't speculate. Who the hell knows? But there's one element that is absolutely required if well, no, it's even required to establish. Especially if I want to establish it throughout the day, I still have to be able to redirect. And so there is a point in this practice. At the beginning, it can be a little bit relaxed when we talk about redirect, right? Because we just want to redirect back to one of our points of attention. That's easy, right? Like I'm on the train and, oh, okay, yeah, well, I'm not really paying attention to anything purposefully. My mind is wandering and I'm thinking about bullshit. So why don't I have headphones on and music playing in my ear? Well, why don't I just go ahead and pay attention to that? Like specifically put my attention on the music and just focus on that. Well, but then my mind starts to think about, oh, no, 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 wait. Like I kind of want to just listen to the music rather than have my mind drift a million different directions and just scatter without my permission. And so what we're talking about is redirecting back to the practice when the mind starts to wander away from it. So we have to come back. In classical psychology, we could look at this as, I like to use the word redirection, but so the idea is that this redirection or this ability to come back to the practice when you start to drift is absolutely essential if we expect to elongate or maintain our practice or maintain our points of attention. Otherwise, we'll just forget. I'll wake up in the morning and I'll say, all right, today I'm going to be outside a lot. So I'm going to do my best to keep a little bit of the sky in my awareness. I'm going to actively pay attention to a little bit of the sky while I do everything else. Why? Because it makes me present. It helps me focus. It helps me concentrate. I feel more self-awareness. I know where my body is and my mind and my breath and my attention as it occurs. It feels really powerful when you're hyper aware of your own physicality and mental state and emotional state, even when it's not flattering. It is what it is, right? But it's still better to be aware of it than to have your head in the sand and just be completely unaware of your own occurrings, right? Your own actions, your own output. Could you imagine it's hard for me to imagine just to be completely oblivious to those things at this point. Like that's hard for me to imagine, to not be aware of my own body. Like that's what is that? Like I can't even imagine it at this point. So redirection is, first of all, it's necessary to establish, right? Because if I have a particular point of attention that I have chosen, well, I have to establish my attention on it. So I was using the mouse. I actually wasn't paying attention to it for the last few seconds. I went away from it, but now I redirect and I go back to paying attention to the mouse. I was starting to think of that word that I couldn't think of. And then so my attention diverted away from the mouse. That's okay. It happens sometimes. And then I just bring it back. And now I'm aware of the mouse again. That's redirection. Any of this make sense, or is it confusing so far? It's been a while since I've tried to
It's making sense very much, considering where the group of us that are attending are at. And it's nice to review because it's sort of like the pillars, a building. If we lose them, then we've kind of lost the practice. So it's nice to review. I have recently been in close discussion with a loved one who is really spinning thoughts, momentum of thoughts that appear to be out of their control, and dysregulation. And so I've had she's asked to speak with me about regulation, and of course I go back to this practice because it's all I've got to share. And so it's bringing to mind the basics, the very fundamental basics, the, you know, presence and mindfulness and deliberate intention. And what do those mean? It's really when you are in dysregulation and the momentum, the tools don't really help. You know, if you're journaling and you can't stay focused, just becomes you writing down the grievances and the worries and the things in your head, then it's not really journaling anymore, and it's not redirection. So it requires this basic principles to be explained. And so I value you doing this right now because it's helpful to me, and I can see it from my perspective, and I can remember it from the beginner perspective. And the principles are all the same.
And you masterfully weaved in the word that I forgot, which was regulation, self-regulation. That's a term used in psychology for basically managing your own mind and state of being.
Yeah, mind management is called self-regulation now, and,
Self-regulation, yeah.
being out of management is they have a whole bunch of diagnoses that they've kind of grouped all together, and now they just call it neurally divergent. In other words, you're not in um, deliberate control of your neurological responses to outside stimuli. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so the practice, well, first I'll just say that virtually, no, not virtually, every single like spiritual teacher that I personally uh, enjoy, I don't follow. I'm not a, I'm, yeah, that's not really my thing. I wouldn't say that I follow anybody. There are some that I'm closer to following than others, I guess you could say maybe. But all of them, even ones separated by space, time, culture, like systems of thought, languages, all of them say that really the only thing that we need to do as human beings is to be exquisitely present, is to squeeze every last little bit of substance that we can from the present moment, and that's actually all we ever need for anything, for a satisfying life, to be productive and helpful and to feel like we're getting a derivative from this experience. That's really all that is necessary. It's just that one thing is to be, and this is especially Thich Nhat Hanh, but to be vibrantly, unapologetically, and without like specific reasons even necessarily present. Like that's the ticket in all of these different spiritual realms, and it shows up in different types of religious ideologies as well. The idea of focus. Prayer, the way that I learned it, is a type of focus. You're focusing your mind to send a message, to communicate. Makes sense to us, makes sense. Communicate, focus. So this practice, casually, I think can be very easy. If you do this practice casually, I think any degree of this practice, a person will notice the benefit to some point because you're more present, right? And there's so much about the present moment that we're missing if we're not really actively engaging it, or we haven't arrived there accidentally for some reason, some rapid change in our environment has really caused us to really focus in on the present moment in such a way that we're very present. Yeah. So that's what this practice is. That's all it is. The practice is how can I be more present? Like what things can I, and they're like, Ernest, be mindful of this, be mindful of that. And I'm like, okay. I want to be mindful and I don't want, so somebody may say, well, you know, today we have a lot of Australians in, and you don't want to give them a thumbs up, right? So this was at a movie theater, and we have a big group coming in, and we are a university town. So oftentimes you could get groups of people, Sometimes we would get groups of foreign exchange students, and so we had to remind everybody that no thumbs up, because thumbs up in Australia is not the same thing as thumbs up in America. And I remember that somebody said, be very mindful of this. And then again in the cannabis industry, I was in an orientation And I don't know what this guy's title was because he left the company like 3 days later. But I mean, he was up there too. And he said, be mindful of dot, 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 like 75 times. Like I lost count and I wanted to count. I really wanted to, but I lost count because he said it too many times. And it's at a certain point, it's like, well, how? Okay, like you've told me what to do, which is be present. You've even told me why. You will benefit. Like you'll get to experience more of your life. You can make changes as you see fit. You can create the world around you with enough attention on it. And it's like, well, okay. So I don't think that establishing this practice is terribly difficult. I think that people can have a good time with that. However, if we do want to elongate and maintain and get to the point where we can really slow down the amount of internal self-talk, really create the space necessary to engage the present moment to a degree that feels vibrant and that feels like conscious creation happening now. Not like, oh, you look back and you're like, I did create. No, it's like, I am doing this as opposed to I have done this. That's just really two different feelings that you would be experiencing. And this practice really brings about that feeling of I am doing this. I am charging the present moment with my awareness. I am choosing the moment. And then we'll get to that. Like the practice, when all four directions are active, will give a person an opportunity to cultivate, to mold the present moment into a package. I've never called it that before, but like I imagined a very exquisitely packaged gift. Like, have you ever gotten a gift and you could just see that the way that they wrapped it must, the quality is just exuding from it. I've never wrapped a present like that, but it's an art in and of itself, right? How you do something is the art of it. So that's kind of what I imagined in my mind was that perfect little packaged present. And now the traps of thinking, 34 minutes into it, sorry, Gina. But the traps of thinking really is when the practice does get difficult. And I'm not going to use any other word. It's it's difficult. It can be very challenging, right? Because there's a certain point when we're confronted with how often our mind is scattered. There will come a point where if you do this practice beyond casually, and casually is fine. Casually, any amount of this practice, I think, will benefit a person's life. Do it. I don't think there's a lot of danger in this practice in the way that we've put it together. So just, go have fun and be more present and make the most out of the moments that you choose to do this practice in. However, if you have your eyes on this feeling of peace, this feeling of creativity, active, vibrant creativity, redirection is mandatory. And we have a rule of three. And those first three we are going to include in the traps of thinking, but the first three is really all we need. And I want to make a very important point clear before we start, is that when we get to the individual traps, in and of themselves, they are not traps. It's when they begin to violate the balance principle. And chances are every single one of them already have for most people. So that's already done deal. But the traps of thinking in and of themselves are not good or bad. It has its usefulness and it kind of has different degrees depending on the situation. So when we start to list these traps of thinking, and I don't know if we'll get through all of them, and I still might forget some, but ultimately we boil down to the subjection of the rule of three, because the rule of three is the balance principle, kind of like our mechanism for the balance principle and helping us to maintain balance. So the rule of three is whenever our thoughts become repetitive, and by thoughts, I mean talking to yourself in your mind. So I know that sometimes thought is used for everything that's happening in your brain. Oh, okay, and I can understand that usage of the word, but when what I'm talking about now are words in our brain, talking to ourselves inside of our own head. Yeah, but the idea is that if we really want to elongate, which is increase the time that we're paying attention to a point of attention, if we want to maintain it, redirection is absolutely necessary. When a thought stream, words in our mind has become repetitive, when it has become habitual, or when we can feel that it is moving us away from our practice, away from inspiration, and ultimately away from feeling how we want to, which is what this
Oh,
practice is all about.
a redirection is everything. This the whole practice is redirection, except that we have to redirect less and less. So it's more about direction as we're further along the practice. The comment that I made, you read long after you made the comment, was, it can be difficult. The degree of difficulty is directly, the degree of effort is directly proportionate to the amount of momentum that you had. We're talking about elongating and maintaining, but for some people who are really spinning, establishing a point of attention. I remember Jean arguing in class. Yeah, I deliberately put my attention on that asshole who cut me off because he cut me off and then he listed all the reasons why. And now you're going to talk about those traps of thinking. Um, the traps of thinking to me are just more tools. They're tools for us to discern and break down what we need direction from. So sometimes it's like he was arguing why I wanted to direct my attention on that guy because he deserved it. The traps of thinking, yeah, but did it not make you feel good? Is it serving you in any way? Is it serving anybody? Like, what is the point of this? Is what you're trying to get away from. So the traps of thinking to me are just extra tools to help me discern the things that are habitual, repetitive, or not making me feel good. And oh, yeah, I'm doing that. I didn't even realize I was doing that. It's not important to label them, but if it helps me identify when it's time to redirect, then they're great to discuss. I also wanted to say that establishing, I know we're skipping over that, but for someone who's really spinning, it, um, it's hard to identify when it's time to even establish what would established points of attention do for me. I already have a ton of things going on in my head. Why do I need a plan on top of all those things going on in my head? And the point to remember is for relief in the beginning, it's not about cultivating peace and all of that. In the beginning, it's just relief because now I can't even discern the difference between my house being untidy or being in a car accident as differentiating the level of trauma that I might react to that. Like everything feels traumatic, and so I have to establish points of attention just for relief. So that's also what I meant by everything, wherever you start the practice, the reasons for it, the need for it, and the ease at which you can do it is directly proportional to how much momentum you have going at the present time.
Hmm. Yeah, I think we should make note of that because we could definitely circle back and talk about that relief. Because I think it's important because if we are using the word relief, it is relief from something. What is it relief from? Like,
Exactly. And
why
everybody
do we feel
that
relief?
is coming to me now for advice or who just needs to talk or to
Right.
vent or, whatever, they're really in a state where the explanation of what they want relief from, because they are that far from peace. Peace is something that seems way down the road. I
Sure.
just don't want to be crazy right now.
Mhm. Yeah, and if we trace this back to the earliest writings of what we're doing, the mind that is scattered will have more sickness and disease, right? A mind that is focused, sickness and disease can be more avoided. So the relief that we're feeling is we're feeling relief from a mind that is scattered and that is going every which direction. And the result of the mind being scattered and going every which direction are a wide variety of emotions and interpretations of emotions and states of being from all of the different pieces of the emotional and physical and
Exactly.
you know.
That's why I say, when people want to discuss all the reasons for why they feel the way they feel, I said, I'll give you a certain amount of time for us to discuss that, but it doesn't matter what they are. It matters how you feel about what they are.
Mhm.
So it doesn't matter if it's dishes in the sink or if it's, my child is struggling. Um, all your feelings are valid. So let's just assume that no matter what litany of things you describe to me, they are all valid.
Mhm.
Then the thing that we need to do to slow it all down is the same.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess will remind me to talk later. I don't personally think that the redirection happens less and less. This, what you're redirecting, how you're redirecting, and how it's making you feel does change with momentum in the practice.
Well, that's
But
event horizon, and then it
mhm.
moves towards peace, and then the more peace you feel, then it's exquisite. It's exquisite.
Well, let's look at
What you
this.
call it?
Well,
Exquisite peace.
let's look at this. So when,
But I
when
really, I really don't want to dissuade you from the traps of thinking. I think it's very valuable at this point, and I think it's timely that you chose to do that.
I'm trying to decide if it's a tangent. I guess probably Shada would say if I have to try to decide, it is. Hmm. Well, it is important. So I
Does it
do.
relate to the topic that at hand? Then if it
Well,
does, then it's not a tangent, I would say.
we could edit. It's fine.
It absolutely is, because the point that I was making originally was that establish is difficult for people, and being able to discern what it is that I'm redirecting from. So
Mhm.
traps of thinking is a helpful is
Oh yeah,
helpful
yeah, for sure.
towards
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But what I was going to say maybe has more to do with cultivation and I was actually going to no, okay, so this is helpful. So we're looking at establishing, elongating, and maintaining. If we can establish and elongate one direction of attention, it will improve our overall ability to focus and concentrate. You know that now when I say these things, this is something that I'm prepared to dedicate some of my career towards proving. Why? Because I got to do something. I mean, walking around, I got hands and a brain, I might as well do something. So, those are things that I feel like I could prove. I could prove that this practice will increase your ability to focus and concentrate the more that you do it. The more that you do it, the more consistent that a person is with it. I am prepared to say that that will happen. So with two directions of attention, if we can start to establish and elongate two directions of attention throughout our day, from the time that we wake up, from the time that we go to bed, not really quite what Donna was talking about, right? Because Donna's talking about at the beginning of the practice, we're just looking to interrupt what was otherwise an uninterrupted stream of repetitive habitual thinking that doesn't make you feel well. And so when we establish our practice, it interrupts that. And there's a feeling of relief in that. So, but now kind of what I'm explaining is that, so when we first start doing this practice, we will feel that relief. And the more that we can learn to elongate and establish the directions of attention, and the third direction, which is breath, is when we start to feel that peace. Three directions of attention active with breath. I am prepared to say that a person will start to experience inner peace. And that's in terms of the practice, though, we may have just jumped a degree, like we may not be, that's not a two-week process type of thing. I don't like putting times on things because everybody is so wildly, uniquely different. But I think it's safe to say that we don't go from an introduction to this practice to cultivating the four directions. Uh, cultivating is the word that I used. So if we can learn to establish and elongate one direction, we will have more focus, more concentration, and more relief. I like that. So maybe doing any of this practice at all. I think we will experience some relief. I'm prepared to back that with Donna. That simply establishing this practice to any degree, we will, to any degree, of course, like Donna said, the degree that we establish the practice will be the degree that we experience the relief. But I am prepared to, I'll think about that. Like, how can I add that? Because I'm prepared to, I'm prepared to back that up, you know, do research and go deep into the tombs of the ancients to find, you know, more validity. So two directions of attention that have been maintained and elongated. We will have more self-awareness, the awareness of ourselves in space and time. That's so valuable, okay? And then three directions of attention, the third direction is breath. We'll have the opportunity to feel much more inner peace. And then if we can start to interact with our fourth direction of attention, and we are establishing, elongating, and maintaining four simultaneous directions of attention, that will create a new third thing. I guess a more a more simple way to say it is that when we engage the fourth direction of attention and learn to maintain and elongate and maintain, we now have the opportunity to learn, grow, and evolve with self-awareness because of those other elements. Learn from our experience, grow from our experience, change over time in a beneficial way with awareness of ourselves. That is the human element that changes everything in the human experience. That could change societies if enough people were practicing it. Of course, that's a huge if, right? But if enough people were doing this practice, that would occur. Does that make sense? If an individual does the practice enough, we will get to the point where we can learn, grow, and evolve with self-awareness. That's not happening in large in the world. And it is at the same time. It's a weird thing. So when we talk about the traps of attention, it's a tool to help you, like Donna was saying, we can get to the point where like, well, which thoughts are good and which thoughts are bad and which thoughts are helpful. And it's like, okay, Donna, I'm going to give you some basic guidelines. Is it repetitive? It's probably not serving you. If you are just thinking the same thought in the same fracking order that you've thought 1,000 times, you're not doing anything except for creating an electrochemical, physiological, hormonal response from a repetitive thought that you've thought 1,000 times. We all know this. You know, this is the spin, right? In Chinese medicine, we would start to say that this is, we're damaging the earth element because of E. You know, our mind is overthinking. And that leads to what Donna was giving an example of pensiveness, where all of a sudden every little thing is this huge problem in our lives. And of course, as Shana pointed out, we'll start to feel anxiety and different types of fear and as automatic responses to our own stimuli that we're generating in our own mind, in our own cognitive space. That's what we're creating. That's the garden that we're tending. Well, we're not tending to it. It's a garden that has a lot of weeds because of the lack of tending to it. So if a thought is repetitive or it's a part of a greater habit, you know, the habit of being offended, the habit of taking it personally, the habit of getting angry when somebody says something, right? The habit of wanting to always be right, the habit of forgetting that other people actually have completely different cultures and ideas than you do, and that they may not see the world the way that you do. That can be a habit. And I'm not free of habits, and you can't be. Actually, the brain is programmed. So that's why we need more self-awareness so that we'll be able to feel which habits are starting to get a little bit in the need of self-regulation zone. So if a thought is repetitive, we should redirect back to our practice. And then, of course, we have a process for that, and that's going back to the practice with at least 3 directions. I also recommend one of those directions to be talking out your practice. What are you doing? I do that still. I was going to mention that, Donna said that we redirect less and less. No, I don't redirect less and less. I redirect a lot. But what I'm redirecting and the way that I'm redirecting is definitely very different. I'm redirecting back to cultivation. Oh, I have forgotten to cultivate this feeling that I want. I'm going to go back to it. And there's so much in the world that pulls me away from it because I just need more practice, right? And so I'm still constantly redirecting. And I'm still looking for habit because I keep seeing it. It keeps showing up. And I'm like, okay, there's a new habit. Fine. And if I start to feel something from it, like I'm going towards a direction that doesn't serve me, and it keeps popping up, well, now it's time to put that on blast and start to redirect that, start to really put a lot of awareness into that habit because I can feel that it's starting to get out of a balance. That will be a lifelong process. I'll be 110 years old gardening and I'll be like, look at that, a new habit. I'm gardening in this particular way, and where did I pick that up? That's weird. And now my wrist hurts because I'm doing it wrong. Okay, well, now I'm aware of it because my wrist hurts. That's probably the impetus. And now I'm going to change it and redirect anytime I start to lose my form, with my rake. I want to say rake. I don't. Yeah, there's other garden utensils that I don't think I can say. So rake or rake, shovel. Does that make sense? Repetitive, habitual, and it feels like it's taking me away from my practice. You can't see that. So repetitive, habitual, it feels like we're going away from our practice. It's not making us feel well. And it's not just not making us feel well, it feels like we're going back towards the madness, back towards our attention being scattered. And I can tell now that I'm not going to have time to get through all the traps of attention, or the traps of thinking, so let's just get into some of them. So I'm gonna the first one that comes to my mind, because I don't want these to be taken in any order, right? They're not, the order is just whichever one are you experiencing. And so we'll just start with comparing and contrasting, which is kind of the same thing. I mean, if you're comparing something, you are contrasting. For some reason, I've always said it that way. Comparing and contrasting, as if those are two different words. All right, so comparing and contrasting, I'm going to ask, if you are sitting and a thought comes that is comparative, and you've never really had this thought before, or maybe you've had it a couple times, who knows? Is it automatically a violation of thought, or a violation of principle, a violation of the practice, a trap of thinking, a comparing and contrasting thought? So let's say I'm at dinner and all of us have ordered and they deliver Eata's to the table, and I look and I'm like, damn, that looks better than what I ordered. Did I not just compare and contrast? Is that a violation in the way that I'm using it?
No, because we're human and you just noticed something and that's fine. But if the second thought and the third thought continues in that direction, then that's what you have to notice.
Yes. Yes. Or if it's, and to what Donna was saying, is it repetitive? How many times have
Well, I do that every time we're out at a restaurant.
Exactly.
Every time that I see what someone's wearing, they're wearing a better outfit than me. If every time it's
that
just
might be more
noteworthy.
habitual. Yeah, that might be more habitual. Remember, repetitive is the exact same, almost the exact same words in the exact same order. So, and those usually do go hand in hand. One is repetitive and habitual at the same time, which is why Gene, of course, said that we only need one of these to need to redirect, not 3. And I was like, that's true. And we don't need to violate all 3 to be like, okay, now I need to, no, just one of them is enough. But you can have a comparing and contrasting thought, and what I want to stress is that this eliminates the guru. There can be no guru in this practice. There can be no master teacher of the second generation, whatever. This just doesn't vibe with this practice. It just doesn't, it doesn't mesh well. It can't. but
I
this is a
think
met. Mhm.
a good gauge of how it makes you feel if you're
Yes,
comparing something,
yes.
and it feels like you're making yourself wrong in the
Hmm.
comparison. But if
And
you're
yeah,
just comparing like the size of clouds or something where there's no emotion involved
exactly.
in it, that's a
Yeah,
different thing.
yeah, exactly. Right. And this is a very individual thing that a person with enough practice will be able to evaluate how it feels, because that's one of the three things. How is it, does this feel like it's taking me towards my practice and more towards what I want? Or does it feel like this isn't really taking me there at all? So that's an important point. And this eliminates the guru, this eliminates the image of perfection, because no matter who you are, these things are going to continue to come up for you because we're human beings and we live in this world that we live in. So comparing and contrasting unto itself is not evil, it's not wrong, it's a way of thinking and not a big deal. However, with that said, for most of the people watching this, comparing and contrasting is a repetitive habitual thought that does not benefit them or others and eventually will make them feel unwell. I said it. For most people, including myself at a certain point, almost all comparing and contrasting was pathological. Like it was leading to dysfunction in my mind, my body, and my spirit. And I have to redirect back to the practice when that happens. And again, redirecting back to the practice, I like to do it with words. Ernest, where is your first direction? Where is your second direction? Where is your mind now? Are these thoughts benefiting you? They're not. So let's redirect. Let's go back to our breath. Let's go back to our body. We're not ignoring. We're not pushing things down. We're not bypassing. We're just not going to make it worse. We're not going to take one thing, stoke it, and turn it into a big ass bonfire of bullshit. That seems like a perfectly logical thing to do, to not create that bullshit. Right? But the thought came up, the feeling occurred, it's already happened, there's nothing you can do about it. We're not into trying to prevent emotions from occurring. It's unnecessary. With enough momentum, with enough practice, everything transforms. It metamorphosizes.
I think that's a word.
It is a word, but I just wasn't sure if it was
I
applicable.
think of it as because I'm comparing and contrasting all the time,
Mm.
but I have now that I'm listening to you talk about this, but there's an element of comparing and contrasting when Ida paints, and it's part of the painting.
Yes,
So that's okay. It's not
that's okay.
necessarily a bad thing.
Mhm.
Comparing and contrasting keeps us from eating poisonous things, you know. So, but I think of it as when I notice myself doing it, it's usually, like Ida said, it's some dialogue about whether it's right or wrong, good or bad. And then it starts to be an evaluation of something, I, or I'm watching other people and I'm watching their behavior. And sometimes it's like a movie. It's very interesting. As long as I'm staying detached from it, I'm okay. But when I notice myself comparing and contrasting, um, I have to think about the way it makes me feel. I can go, ooh, that was a judgment. That's noteworthy. That's what I say to myself all the time. That's noteworthy. Now, be mindful about what is this deliberate? You can continue along this line if you want, but make sure you're being deliberate and you're not going down some rabbit hole of thoughts that are habitual, repetitive, or not serving you in some way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Noteworthy.
And I mean, I'll give a personal example. So, one of my psychological challenges was extreme form of social anxiety. And what is a person constantly doing in their mind when they're socially anxious? Well, you're comparing and contrasting. You're constantly doing it. You're usually comparing and contrasting yourself to other people. And that looks a lot like, oh my God, like how do I look? How am I being perceived? Is my breath bad? Do I have something in my teeth? Is my haircut okay? Am I fitting in? Did I just say that? Is that stupid? What do they think about that? How are they reacting? What is that? And years and years and years of that repetitive habitual stream of thought without interruption created a situation inside me that felt awful. Absolutely so awful. It is one of the reasons I'm here right now, is because I didn't want that to be my life. I'm like this, no, like as far as I know for sure, I get this life, right? Maybe there's something after, maybe there was something before, yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. But I have this. I'm sure this is this. It's a computer simulation, Ernest. I still have it. It's this. This is mine. This is my life. And I don't want it to be that state of being. And so this practice for me I started to develop it and flourish it and piece it together. And so I can remember it and do it. But comparing and contrasting for me got wildly pathological. It got terrible to the point where I was comparing everything. I'm looking at my shopping cart. I'm looking at the people in the line at McDonald's, judging, constantly comparing and contrasting myself to other people, other situations. Well, I should be smarter than this. I should be further than this. I should be better than this. One of the ways that people compare and contrast the most in our modern society is the way that they look. So, am I skinny enough? Let's do it from a perspective for myself. And am I strong enough? Am I masculine enough? Can I bench press enough? Do you know what the bicep does? The bicep is responsible for supination of the wrist and elbow flexion, and it's one of the sexiest muscles, but it doesn't really do that much. Like, how often do I have to pull things to my face like this, really heavy things? Like, I don't really do heavy elbow flexion, you know? How many times have I had to turn a 10,000-pound doorknob? Zero. It's just an interesting thing. I was so worried about like being that image of masculine man. And then I look at it and I'm like, yeah, I get it. Biceps are cute. I think so, you know, but it's really not that functional to focus and isolate certain muscles like that. And I would be constantly evaluating, do I look fat in this outfit? You know, is this outfit cool?
So much habit and momentum in that direction. I consider myself well along the path of this practice. I have a lot of peace. I was just thinking about on Christmas Day, I happen to be here in Connecticut and was invited to a family, and it was their intimate Christmas gathering. I was the only person that wasn't family, close family, and it was lovely of them. And there was a conversation going on at the table, and the adults were at one end and the children were at the other, and I was kind of in the in-between point. And they said something to me or asked something or they referring to me, and I was listening to the children's conversation because I actually found it far more interesting. And then there was this big pause, and I noticed the pause, so I turned and everybody was looking at me, and I said, "Oh, did you ask me a question? Does this call for my response?" And I pointed to the kids, and I was like, "I was listening to them. I wasn't really listening to you." But I didn't apologize, and I didn't feel embarrassed, and I didn't feel so that was noteworthy. But now you're talking about social anxiety. I don't have that with other people, except it took me way too long to get ready to leave the house because of the way that I look. I still have so much momentum and I don't know, belief, I guess, when to not look in the mirror, to check myself before I leave and go through the list of things that I am unhappy with and do they meet the minimal qualifications so I could get out the door and not feel self-conscious. Once I'm out the door, I don't feel self-conscious, but boy, that process of getting there is still full of quite a bit of momentum. It's amazing to me that, and it's noteworthy for sure.
Yeah, for sure, noteworthy. And the comparing and the contrasting, it will look different, right? For different people and what they're creating and what they're generating. I did both. I was constantly comparing like myself to other people and even myself to myself, you know. So like comparing and
But I think
contrasting.
it was noteworthy of the other people that I carry
Ah,
myself confidently
mhm.
and I don't feel self-conscious. But if they
Yeah,
would have heard with the dialogue in my head, when I last looked in the mirror leaving the house, they would see
It was
something
still,
very different. So
yeah,
yeah, and
yeah,
that's all in the same human being.
right. Yeah. Yeah. So comparing and contrasting is, it can be natural, right? It can be something that's very, this is the balance principle. We're not looking to never compare and contrast ever again for the rest of our lives, ever, 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 no matter what, ever, or your, or your DNA will unravel. But I will say that one of the biggest traps that I have ever experienced is the image of perfection. And that's not just comparing and contrasting yourself to a person, it's comparing and contrasting yourself to an idea of something that maybe doesn't even exist. Maybe it does, I don't know. Sure, I don't know. But why am I comparing myself to Buddha? Like, why am I comparing myself to this image of perfection that I've never seen? That created the type of suffering where I felt, this was, during Jehovah's Witnesses days, especially, that gets really depressive. That's not anxiety anymore. Same thing, comparing and contrasting. I'm kind of leaning into Donna's, something that I think Donna was pointing out. The comparing and the contrasting is the same. What the individual is creating, can be a little bit different depending on who the person is. The same person can create different types of derivative from the comparing and the contrasting. The same person can have anxious comparing and contrasting, and I just gave the one that was actually kind of depressive. If you're constantly putting this image of perfection that you're constantly falling short of, I got very depressed. I was like, this is just, what's the point? Like, I'm never going to be perfect. Like, I'm not going to walk on water. You have to have so much faith that you can just step out of the boat and walk on. No, my ass is sinking to the bottom. Sorry. Like, I'm going to start to talk about, my mind is going to start to go into the physics of it. This is just displacing water. There's just, and gravity will pull me. There's just no way. And your life's moments are passing without any engagement or appreciation. That thing that we said at the beginning, that all we needed to do isn't being done. And that's fully embracing the present moment. That might be all we have time for. What do you think? Do you want to do another one? Comparing and contrasting gets deep. All of these do, really. And comparing and contrasting to an image of perfection or a guru type of thing, I think that has caused generational type of traumas. Uh, let's not be abstract. Generational patterns that continue to be played out by one generation to the next. One generation gets the pattern in motion, and that helps to perpetuate the pattern into the next generation of human beings. Mm, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that 1440, you said that to me. I never knew there were 1440. And I know there's references to it everywhere, but it's something that I go back to all the time, especially if someone is arguing for their limitations, or they're arguing why it's human nature and natural to be, you know, to feel this way or to react this way or to hold a grudge or whatever arguing for their limitation is what I see. And I go, sure, you have a right to feel that way and you have a right to choose what you choose. But in the interim, when you're doing that, when I look at myself and I see the amount of time I spent getting ready and looking in the mirror in ways that, like, what could I have been doing with those? I am 65 years old. I have less time on the planet than I have lived on the planet. There will never be another Donna Ingolia ever, ever again. So I have 1,440 minutes in this day to appreciate this life, which I don't know when it's going to end. I'm projecting out in the 90s, but it could be space junk falls from the sky and lands on my head when I walk out the door today. And was it worth it? What? What a waste of my minutes to spend time looking in the mirror, disparaging myself. It's just nonsense if I look at it from that perspective. And so that's where I go back to, or when I'm having this discussion with somebody about the validity or the, unavoidable nature of, and everyone then comes up with their own comparisons of when they were really sick and when they had this operation and they almost died, and the feeling of appreciation because they didn't. And I was like, oh, that sounds like that might have faded when you were arguing with me about why it was so important to not look fat in that dress. Yeah, so it's all relative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anybody else? Anybody else have?
Well, I
Yeah,
just
go ahead.
wanted to say when Donna was talking about getting ready to go out, because I've had those anxieties too, and years of being a hairdresser and having to look good in front of the mirror when you're working in the beauty industry, where you're attempting to make other people feel good about themselves. I have that quote, and it sticks in my head: over prepare, then go with the flow.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm in front of the mirror now,
Say it
I say,
again, Ida,
this is
please. I didn't hear it.
over prepare, then go with the flow. So you're getting ready to go out and you do everything you can. This is what I do. I do my hair, do my makeup, and get some flattering clothes that I think, and kind of do the best I can and then forget about it. So over prepare, then go with the flow.
Mm-hmm.
You're ready, and I don't even look at myself in the car if I'm driving, in the mirror in the car, because I've done it. I've done the best I can do, and then I just forget about it. And I find that works for quelling any anxiety about how you look when you're going into a place, because you've done. I leave that behind, and at the mirror, and
Mm-hmm.
just go on from there.
Yeah.
And what is you're on your way out. I'm not going to waste any more time on how I look because I've done that.
Mm-hmm.
I find that works for me.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that the redirection technique would be pivotal. Like it would be essential for that, because just because we say we're not going to look at ourselves in the mirror in the car doesn't mean it's not going to happen, right? Just because we say that we're just going to let it go once we leave doesn't mean it's going to happen. So that probably took a little bit of practice in redirection. And you find yourself looking in the mirror, you're like, well, no, wait a second. I'm going to redirect back to my practice. I told myself, what it is what it is, and you maybe even have to talk to yourself in that way. That is redirection, right? Does that make sense, Edith? Does that sound?
Yes, well, I do use that quote even if I'm in the car,
There you go. Yeah,
even
and
before I go into my sister's house, and I think maybe I should put some lipstick on or something, and then I think, no, I've done all that. Over prepare, go with the flow. This is the best I can do, and that's it.
yeah, over
And that
prepare,
helps
and
me
then whatever happens
go with the
happens. Just go
flow.
with it. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So comparing and contrasting is an epidemic. Like it's a global, no, if it's global, it's a global pandemic type of situation that's occurring
Oh,
with comparing and contrasting.
it's an intentional force used in ad campaigns and
Of course.
everything, in the
Yeah.
news and everything.
Mhm.
Fear and anger. You want to get people's attention, so that's the way you do it.
Yeah. And it does generate certain types of feelings, like in the comparative and contrasting, and you come to the conclusion that I am doing much better than these miserable folks. Feels good. Yeah, but, so with the right amount of awareness, we'll be able to eventually be able to distinguish, what are we feeling? Where is it coming from? That's a big part of this practice, is emotional intelligence and emotional regulation. Not quite the topic of conversation, but this practice definitely gets to that. It has to include that. All right, I think that's good. We can do part 2 next Thursday, and then, we'll slowly work these out. I have a couple more, sort of. This is just a list I really like the way Donna said it. It's just a list that's trying to help you. It's not as if there are 7 essential. I'm so sick of numbering things. Because it's like, are you sure? Like, is there only 6? What if there's 7? What if there's 8? So yeah. So, maybe I'll forget some later. Maybe I'll add some. Does my school schedule next Thursday work? It does not. You're right. I think we're gonna have to switch to Fridays. Is that cool? I have Fridays. That's a good point. Shannon makes a good point. Sorry, forgot about classes start Monday. So Friday is the day I have available. So if folks have Friday instead of Thursday, I might have to do Friday instead.
Do you mean Fridays, plural, or
hmm
just this Friday?
Fridays plural. Yeah,
Fridays, uh, early.
early. Yeah.
Yeah, early's good for me no matter what, because nothing's
Okay.
going on.
Okay, cool. All right. So I'll probably have to switch to Fridays with my new school schedule. Um, yeah, I think eight. So is eight early enough? I'm I'm fine with it.
That's 9 for me, and I usually have 10 o'clock weight training on Friday, so maybe not.
Okay. I don't mind it being earlier.
I don't know how everybody else's schedules work.
hmm
Earlier is okay for me.
hmm Not like super earlier, but I'm a 5 a.m. person, so 5 a.m. is the best for me.
I'm up at 6, so I don't
Yeah,
care.
there you go. All right, well, we'll work on a time, and then I'll let you know for Friday, but we'll do part. I mean, we'll probably have to do part two, part three, part four, just because I want to make sure we talk about these, because one of the reasons that they're so important is because it is saturated on the island of the practical with the traps of thinking.
I remember them being important, and I remember them being useful, but at the time that we were doing stuff, I was taking copious notes and there was a lot of information, and it what I needed from you, and you did for me, but it was all one big lump of things to remember, and then
Mhm.
separating it into why do I need to remember the traps of thinking if what I want to do is redirect from them? And now it's much clearer, obviously,
Mhm.
because I can see how, because it was a big tangled ball of string in my head. And that's why I just made the point of saying, I'm glad we're talking about this now, because the list was useful to me then, but it started to meld into my trying to remember all these things, the rule of three,
Mhm.
3 rules of whatever, and what's the difference between establishing, long, and maintain, and where does that fit into what we already talked about? And you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So it's really helpful. It's always helpful to go over it. It's always helpful to have a beginner's mind. And the traps of thinking, I think, were just in my mind, I kept them as an aside because my mind was so full of information about this that I had to keep it as an aside.
Mhm.
And it was only when people brought it up in class I would go, "Oh yeah, I was comparing and contrasting," or I
Mhm.
was now I can see it from a different perspective,
Yeah.
and so it's really useful.
Mhm. Yeah. All right, cool. So that was, I guess we'll label this one just comparing and contrasting with a little bit of
Yeah, I think
review.
the traps of attention, because it was an aside for me, is also where they sneak into my coasting.
hmm
So it might be a really timely thing for me. I'm sure it
hmm
is because it always is, and that's what synchronicity is.
hmm
So yeah, I'm enjoying it. I don't know about anybody else.
All right, cool. Okay, so we will go through the traps of thinking and then we'll move on to another topic. And we'll just keep on working the four directions into a thing. So, all right. Well, if you have questions or comments or anything you guys want to talk about or think that I should add or something maybe that I have forgotten, just let me know. But otherwise, I will see you next Thursday or next Friday, and we'll pick it up from there. So maybe we'll jump into, oh, what's a really fun one? Psychological time. Hmm. Existing in psychological time. So maybe that's a good cliffhanger because that's also all of these traps of attention, the traps of thinking, these are very prevalent. They are a gross disproportionate imbalance in today's society. So yeah, be prepared for that a little bit too. All right, cool. Happy New Year, and I will see everybody next week if you can make it. All right, bye
Thank you.
guys.
Happy New Year,
Yep, Happy
everyone.
New Year. See ya.